The development of self-propelled artillery by the U.S. Army dates back to the closing stages of the First World War. In the interwar years, multiple projects aimed to create such weapons, but progress was slow due to budget limitations and mechanical challenges. A significant breakthrough came in the late 1920s with the introduction of the 75mm M1 Pack Howitzer. This lightweight and versatile weapon presented a promising opportunity to develop a cost-effective and capable self-propelled artillery system. Early attempts included mounting the howitzer on the T1 light tank chassis, but these efforts were ultimately abandoned due to the platform's limitations. The situation improved with the introduction of the M3 and M5 light tank series. These mass-produced vehicles featured more robust and reliable chassis, making them ideal foundations for light self-propelled artillery projects. Rather than mounting the entire howitzer, U.S. Army engineers integrated only the 75mm M1 barrel and breech into a specially designed open-topped turret. After successful prototype testing, the concept proved viable with no significant issues. The resulting vehicle, designated the 75mm Howitzer Motor Carriage M8, entered service in 1942, providing U.S. forces with a mobile and effective fire support vehicle. Hello, dear viewer. Tank Encyclopedia is currently closing in on 100,000 subscribers. With this important milestone in sight, we'd like to remind you to subscribe if you enjoy our content and want to see more. Now, back to the video. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Army launched a series of experimental projects aimed at mounting a 75mm howitzer on the newly developed light tank chassis. Early attempts sought to integrate the howitzer with a fully enclosed superstructure, but those were not successful. These designs suffered from several major flaws. The howitzer had limited traverse, the interior was cramped, and the exposed barrel was vulnerable to damage. To address these issues, the project designated as T-47 took a different approach. Designers realized that achieving an optimal arc of fire required mounting the howitzer in a turret. However, the size of the complete howitzer made this challenging. To overcome this, engineers used only the breech and barrel, omitting the rest of the assembly. These components were then installed in an open-top turret, providing greater flexibility and crew space. Initially, the M3 light tank chassis was chosen, but the M3 was close to being phased out in favor of the M5 at the time, so it made sense to adopt that one instead. The two models were nearly identical, with the primary differences being their hull shapes and engines. Soon afterwards, work began on constructing the first operational prototype, which was completed and presented to U.S. Army officials at Aberdeen Proving Ground in September 1942. Following a series of tests and trials, the vehicle's overall design was deemed successful and officially accepted into service under the designation 75mm Howitzer Motor Carriage M8. In U.S. Army terminology, motor carriage refers to a self-propelled chassis. For simplicity, this vehicle will be referred to as the M8 throughout the video. Since the Motorcar Division of General Motors Corporation was already producing the M5 light tank, it was chosen to manufacture the M8 as well. Between September 1942 and January 1944, about 1,778 M8s were produced. The M8 featured a straightforward hull design divided into several compartments. The front section housed the drive compartment, containing the drive units and transmission. Behind it was the crew compartment, followed by the engine at the rear. For easier maintenance and repairs, the final drive and transmission housing were bolted to the hull. The last 178 M8s were fitted with a rear-mounted pintle, allowing them to tow either an M8 or M10 ammunition trailer to increase their ammunition capacity. The M8 trailer could carry 93 rounds, while the M10 trailer held up to 117. Powering the M8 were two side-by-side Cadillac V8 liquid-cooled gasoline engines, each producing 110 horsepower. Power was transmitted through two propeller shafts to front-mounted hydromatic transmission units, providing 6 forward speeds and 1 reverse. With a combat weight of 15.5 tons, the M8 could reach a top speed of 35 miles an hour. Fuel was stored in two 86-gallon tanks positioned on either side of the engine, giving the vehicle a maximum operational range of 172 miles on good roads. The M8 utilized a vertical volute spring suspension. The system consisted of 2 bogies per side, each with 2 road wheels. Additionally, the vehicle featured front-mounted drive sprockets, rear-positioned idlers, and 3 small return rollers. The superstructure armor design was primarily flat, with the front and parts of the side plates angled for added protection. The front featured 2 large observation ports, one for the driver and one for the assistant. No additional observation ports were present on the side plates. Positioned above the observation ports, 4 M9 periscopes were installed, 2 allocated to the driver and 2 to the assistant. With 2 periscopes faced forward, the others offered lateral coverage. Since the 75mm howitzer could not be installed inside the M5 light tank's turret, an entirely new one had to be designed. To provide more working space and a better all-round view, the turret's top was mostly left open. Many vehicles were equipped with attachments on the turret's side to hold track gaussers. Although the top was mostly open, part of the rear section of the turret was covered. A round metal ring was placed just behind the main armament, serving as a mount for the heavy machine gun. The internal walls of the turret were used to store various equipment and the crew's personal belongings. The M8's main armament was a modified 75mm M1 Pack Howitzer, originally designed for specialized troops like paratroopers, marines, and mountain units. The M1 was lightweight and could be disassembled into smaller parts for easier transport by individual soldiers. It primarily fired fixed or semi-fixed ammunition, including heat or high-explosive anti-tank, high-explosive, and smoke rounds. The howitzer had a maximum rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute and featured a horizontal sliding block breech. The M1 howitzer saw service in nearly all theaters where the U.S. Army was engaged. However, it was particularly valued by the Marines in the Pacific, where its lightweight and firepower were proved advantageous. Since the M1 howitzer, even with its trail and wheels removed, could not be directly installed in the M8's turret, U.S. engineers repurposed its barrel and breech. These components were placed in a specially designed mount that incorporated elements of the M4 Sherman's M34 gun mount, allowing for quicker development and reuse of existing parts. The new howitzer assembly, designated M2, featured a large barrel support sleeve and had a combined weight of approximately 341 pounds. The M2 was produced in relatively small numbers. Fewer than 200 vehicles were outfitted with it. The remaining vehicles were equipped with a slightly improved model, the M3. The main difference is that the M3 didn't use a separate barrel support sleeve. To manage recoil, 2 recoil cylinders were positioned on either side of the barrel. Additionally, a large breech shield was installed to prevent accidental injury to the turret crew. Both the turret traverse and gun elevation were manually operated. The traverse mechanism was located on the right side, allowing for full 360-degree rotation. The main armament could aim down 20 degrees and up 40, with a maximum fire range of about 5.5 miles when using high explosive rounds. The M8 could fire 4 different rounds, the Heat M66, high explosive M41A1 and M48 rounds, and lastly the M64 smoke round. Heat rounds could penetrate up to 90mm of armor, giving the M8 respectable anti-armor capabilities. However, its low muzzle velocity of 305 meters per second significantly limited its effectiveness in combat. For targeting, the gunner used an M56 or M70C telescope sight for direct fire engagements. When engaging long-range targets, he relied on the M12A5 panoramic telescope. A traveling lock was used to secure the howitzer and turret while the vehicle was in motion. The M8 carried a total of 46 rounds for its main gun. For the secondary armament, you got a 12.7mm heavy machine gun, though some crews occasionally added an additional 7.62mm machine gun on the turret to increase firepower. Mounted on a round pintle, the heavy machine gun provided a full 360-degree field of fire, independent of the turret, and could also be used in an anti-aircraft role. But the standard ammunition load was only 400 rounds. Naturally, being based on a light tank, the M8 had relatively thin armor. The front hull armor measured 29mm, with the driver's front plate being slightly thicker at 38. The hull and superstructure sides ranged between 25 and 29mm, while the engine compartment at the rear was protected by 25mm of armor. The superstructure top was 13mm thick, and the bottom varied between 10 and 13mm. The turret front and gun mantlet were the most heavily armored parts, both measuring 38mm thick. The turret sides and rear were slightly thinner at 25. The M8 had a crew of 4, a commander, gunner, driver, and driver's assistant. The commander and gunner were positioned in the turret, with the commander, who also served as a loader, seated on the left side, while the gunner sat on the right. The driver and his assistant were located in the hull, with the driver on the left and the assistant on the right. In the event that the driver was injured or killed, the assistant could take over immediately, as he had access to a secondary set of controls without needing to change position. Once a sufficient number were produced, the M8 was allocated to the reconnaissance elements of various units, primarily mechanized cavalry reconnaissance squadrons. These squadrons were typically equipped with 6 M8s, which were assigned to Troop E task formations, also known as assault gun formations. Despite the name, due to their lack of armor, M8s were rarely, if ever, used in direct assault operations. Their primary role was to provide long-range fire support to other units. A common practice was to divide the 6-vehicle squadron into smaller platoons, each consisting of 2 vehicles. Reconnaissance elements from armored divisions had larger squadrons with 8 M8s, while light tank and armored infantry battalions only had 3. The U.S. Army relied primarily on M8 armored cars or M3 or M5 light tanks for reconnaissance operations. These were equipped with 37mm guns, which was sufficient for engaging lightly armored targets, but ineffective against anything really fortified. The primary role of these units was to avoid combat and instead gather and relay critical information about enemy positions, strengths, and weaknesses. However, they did occasionally have to engage the enemy to acquire this vital intelligence before passing it on to follow-up units. In these rare situations, any additional firepower was welcome. This is where the M8 came in. It provided long-range fire support for reconnaissance units that needed to get closer to the enemy and gather valuable intelligence. The first M8s were issued in 1943, initially seeing service in Italy and later in France in 1944. Some even made their way to the Pacific Theater. The end of the war marked a conclusion to the M8's service to the U.S. Army, as its 75mm howitzer was deemed too small in caliber for the artillery support role. Instead, it was replaced with the 105mm armed M37. The M8's turret, beyond its use of its original configuration, was repurposed in various innovative ways. One notable adaptation involved mounting the turret on the Landing Vehicle Tract, or LVT. This vehicle was used during river crossings in Europe and amphibious assaults in the Pacific Theater. The M8's turret was also tested on the T-17E3 armored car prototype. However, this project was short-lived and ultimately cancelled. Another experimental project involved an M8 turret rearmed with a 75mm gun. But like the T-17E3, it never made it past the prototype stage. Unlike most other U.S. armored vehicles exported to Allied forces during the Second World War, the M8 was largely excluded from any Lend-Lease programs for unspecified reasons. The main exception was the French army, which did receive a supply of them. Additionally, a small number were provided to the Yugoslav partisans. After the war, several countries managed to acquire M8s through various means. One interesting example is Mexico, which repurposed some M8 turrets for use on their Buffalo armored vehicles. However, only a limited number of these modified vehicles were produced in the mid-1980s. Remarkably, they're still in service to this day. And that concludes our video on the US 75mm howitzer motor carriage M8. What do you think about this little glass cannon? Should they have mass-produced the seal clubber box instead? Share your opinions in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider Patreon or PayPal. Finally, we want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Alex Harvey, Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Schuford, Leslie Halkower, Michael Herman, Owen M., and Wolfhund. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.